Yeah, I would definitely avoid the business is more important than people line of thinking. I would definitely defer to experts on this. I am a first year college student, definitely not a virologist, an epidemiologist, or a doctor of any kind. But to me, it seems like we should be prioritizing the health and safety of people rather than trying to go ahead with events of any kind or business. I think if the experts are telling us to socially distance, to self isolate, and to practice good hygiene, we should do those things and not put those behind anything else. And also, I did remember the fight I was referring to, the social distancing fight, Emmanuel Yarbrough versus Daiju Takashi.
Oh, well, that would be a good example. I think that one fits perfectly.
Right.
So, what do you make of the landscape now being bereft almost entirely of shows, save for one isolated event in Florida here or there? What do you think this means for MMA as a whole going forward? How are we going to recover from, even if UFC still decides they have to run come hell or high water, most other people aren't. So there's going to be a lot of fighters not making any money for the foreseeable future, and it could affect the livelihood of reporters as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If this pandemic is something that's going to continue to affect the world and the MMA world for a prolonged period of time, we might see layoffs or releases in large droves. Obviously, I'm not saying this as a way to cause panic or a way to cause too much concern, but looking at it from a perspective of MMA events need to happen in order for fighters to get paid. And now we can argue on whether or not that should be the case, specifically with events that were affected by the coronavirus. But in order to get paid, a fighter must fight under the current gig economy that they participate in. And in order to get paid, we have to cover those events. So if events are not going on, jobs are threatened in that sense. But I also think that the major players in the sport will be taken care of. I think the UFC, like other organizations like the NBA, NHL, even though there is a disparity between those two groups, will be able to ride this out. And I believe that several other promotions will be able to as well. Bellator, for example, with Viacom. But certain regional shows might take a serious hit here. If you're a promotion that is going event to event, or you are hemorrhaging money through your events, but still in your build phase, or you're trying to do it out of a labor of love, this could be a very difficult time for you. And I would not be surprised to see fighters, promoters, and media members involved in the world of combat sports um, falling on hard times during a prolonged period of absence.
So, what do you make of fighters who criticize people who go on Twitter and say, "Hey, I'm out of work right now. I have a GoFundMe. If you want to contribute a few bucks, it would really help me and my family out." You've got some fighters out there who are taking a very negative approach to that and saying, "Find a job, get some work, don't beg for a handout."
Yeah, it's a very difficult topic, but the way I would approach that is by saying, if you're someone who has the means to survive a global pandemic, where the majority of people are not being permitted to leave their homes and go to work, if you're someone who has enough money saved up, or a job that is able to telecommute, or a job that is unaffected by this, be lucky for that. Be grateful for that and enjoy the fact that that happens. There are a lot of people who are affected by this in ways that perhaps some don't truly understand unless they've experienced them. And to that, I would say be mindful of other people's circumstances and that they may differ from our own. But as far as fighters not being able to compete or receive a paycheck, I know Bellator, Scott Coker paid the fighters for the event that they canceled last minute just before the UFC's Brasilia event. That is a commendable step from a promoter. That is a promoter who had money set aside for a group of athletes that he knew he was going to pay for an event. And when the event was canceled, of no fault of their own, followed through and did the right thing. So I would say to promoters who do have those means to follow in those footsteps. And I would certainly hope that fighters who are less fortunate or fighters who do not have as stable financial situations are taken care of, provided that that is in the cards.
I think so too. And where it really would upset me the most is some of the early prelim fighters on a UFC, Bellator, any kind of card. Those are
Right,
the guys who might be making 1-1, 3-3, 5-5, very small amounts of money that wouldn't even cover their training and medical expenses. If
right.
those guys can't make that payday, then they're getting deep in the hole trying to be a fighter, just trying to make it at all.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people complain about the UFC's fighter pay. That doesn't take into account the fact that regional shows are a fraction of that. Um, Even if they're a fraction of that, in some cases, it's virtually negligible. So, fighters are not a group of people who, by and large, are financially situated to be able to just fight. And even if they are, to be able to sit out for a prolonged period of time. Training is an expensive process. Nutrition and weight cutting is an expensive process. The physical therapy and medical care that these fighters need as a result of their occupation is not an easy thing to do financially. So, if fighters are not getting that somewhat regular check of being a fighter and taking a fight and earning their purse, that is a very worrisome thing if you're interested in the fighter's interest.
I can tell you how many fighters I've interviewed over the last decade where they've said to me, this is not my full-time career. I work
Right,
as an electrician. I work
right,
in wood carving. You know, they've all got a second job, unless you're like at the very top of the pay scale, like the guys you were saying that we know will be taken care of, the John Jones
exactly.
type of guys. A lot of people are working another job just to pursue the dream of being a fighter.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, one that always stands out to me is Jeff Neal, because of course he was the baddest waiter alive. But even though the nickname is terrific, and I definitely would give him a sizable tip if I was being served by him, it's ridiculous to think that such a talented fighter, such a rising star within the promotion, would be working a second job. And obviously, cases vary, and certain individuals have certain um, situations. But to think that a lot of these fighters do have second jobs, if they're not getting the paycheck from a fight and their job is something where they can't telecommute or they face any kind of issues as a result of the pandemic, that's something to be worried about as well.
I totally agree. So I think in conclusion, we can say that it's going to be rough times ahead until anything can be resolved with this pandemic, and nobody knows when exactly that's going to be. The
Hopefully
optimistic,
soon.
yeah, the optimistic people believe it'll be by Easter. I think that's very questionable. I believe that the pandemic has not even peaked in the United States yet, and I don't think we're going to be running large scale events here with a crowd anytime soon.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that. Based on the things that I've been reading and watching, as far as news broadcasts and expert testimonies of that to that effect, I would definitely agree. I don't think this is going to be something that's resolved quickly, though I hope that it is. So I think we all need to just practice social distancing, practice good hygiene, and take care of ourselves in the best way we can.
Absolutely. Everybody follow the guidelines from your local and state health officials. Follow the CDC and WHO guidelines as well. Do what it takes to be safe and keep other people healthy too, because it's not just about your own health. It's about flattening the curve because, as we alluded to earlier, you could be a carrier and not even know it and get somebody else sick. And if they're immunocompromised, you're putting their life at risk with your carelessness. So everybody needs to do their part.
Absolutely.
All right, Michael, I want to give you this chance to do some plugs for yourself, for the Body Lock, and for anything else you'd like at this time.
Well, thank you very much, first and foremost. It was great to be on the show, great conversation, and I hope to be back soon. And then as for plugs, I would just say to anyone to check out our site, TheBodyLockMMA.com, and to follow me on social media at Michael Fiedel.
All right, Michael, I appreciate the time today. Thank you so much for being here on Glove Up or Shut Up. And stay tuned, everybody, for part 2, where Peter H. and I will discuss the very first Pride show from October of 1997.